Hi, I'm Bruce with the Space Force Association, and you've tuned in to the Spacepower Radio Show, and I'm super glad you did, and I think you will be too. I have a couple of great guests today. I had a chance to catch up with a retired 3-star Space Force General, General Liquori, and he's fun, he's interesting, and he knows a thing or two about the Space Force. You won't want to miss that. And here's an interesting fact. Did you know that things launch into space from the middle of New Mexico? It's true. And I had a chance, it's a place called Spaceport America, and I had a chance to catch up with the executive director, Scott McLaughlin of Spaceport America, and we will have a chance to talk with him about what's going on in New Mexico. So stay tuned. My guest is Scott McLaughlin, Executive Director of Spaceport America. I'm super excited to talk with Scott today. Just a little background. He was born and raised in New Mexico, has a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering, which we have in common, from New Mexico State, and established a radar and design manufacturing business. Looks like you sold that out and then returned to the Land of Enchantment. I did not remember that's what New Mexico is called. Returned to the Land of Enchantment and lifelong love of space and aviation. You started with as the Director of Business Development at Spaceport America, and just a couple of years ago, in 2021, you were selected as the Executive Director of Spaceport America. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here, Bruce. Good to talk about Spaceport America.
Yeah, it's great. So I'm a blank page when it comes to Spaceport America. I know of it, but you typically will hear about the Kennedy Space Center and Vandenberg Spaceport and some of the others. But I don't hear a lot about what's going on at Spaceport America. But I know there is a lot going on. So tell me about Spaceport America.
Sure. Let me back up. I'll go back, and you stop me if I go in too long. But
Okay.
the whole idea behind a commercial spaceport goes back to 1984 and the Commercial Space Launch Act, which is what the federal government passed that allows SpaceX to exist, but it allows commercial spaceports to exist. So that happened in 1984, but even back in the 90s, the state of New Mexico was looking for a place to put a spaceport. They had started something called the Southwest Regional Spaceport. And they were doing studies and analysis of where you could do reentry, where you could do takeoff and landing. And so that was all throughout the 90s. And then comes along something called the Ansari X Prize, which was to go to space twice, I think in 2 weeks, with a $10 million prize. And by the time Scale Composites and Paul Allen won that, Sir Richard Branson, who had already created the brand of Virgin Galactic and was friends with our governor at the time, when Scale Composites won that, a deal was quickly made that New Mexico, who knew where to put the spaceport by then and had already been working on the paperwork, was able to create it. So we weren't the first commercial spaceport, but we like to say we're the first purpose-built spaceport, commercial spaceport. So we go all the way back to about 2004, 2005, 2006, when the state decided to make that commitment and have a handshake with Virgin Galactic. And so that's how long we've been along. And then over the years, we've slowly been building up a customer base. And in the last 5 years, we've really been doing a lot. And we've, of course, Virgin Galactic moved here about 6 years ago to complete the operational phase. And they're now going to bring 2 new space vehicles back late this year and early next year and restart the commercial, astronaut passenger business. So we're very much looking forward to that, because that could be on the order of 2 launches a week once we get going. But in the meantime, we've done things like we have high altitude platform systems, HAPS systems. Those are large UAVs that fly at 60,000 feet and above and can hang out there for weeks and months at a time. A little while ago, a few weeks ago, we had Venus Aerospace that launched one of the first rotating detonation rocket engines. It was a vertical flight off of our new launch rail that we put together, a 40-foot launch rail that's available to customers. So what else do we do? We got Spin Launch here, who was pretty active a few years back and is getting ready to start doing some more suborbital flights. We have Leap Aerospace that wants to do some vertical flights once a month. And then we've got a ground station that's been here a couple of years, and we're even talking to a data center. It's all part of the New Mexico Spaceport Authority. Like you said, I'm the executive director of the NMSA. And our job is basically economic development, but it does require some technical expertise, and that's why an engineer, I guess, is in charge of the organization right now. So that's a quick little nutshell out of, if you like.
Yeah, that's super exciting. I had no idea. And by the way, I did not realize. I think everyone heard Virgin Atlantic kind of followed or Virgin Galactic, I should say, and followed the missions there. But I didn't realize that they're getting ready to do some more activity there.
Yeah, it's very exciting. They've actually been doing a very good job. If you go to their YouTube page, they have Virgin Galactic has a great YouTube page, and they've been letting us the public in on the production of the vehicles that's occurring in Mesa, Arizona. So they have lots of suppliers around the country that are making these carbon composite parts and the titanium and other things, but they're all coming together in Mesa, Arizona. And there's if you're a bit of a space nerd and want to see how a glider, space vehicle, airplane is put together, that's a good place to watch these videos. They're, I don't know, 6 or 7 or 8 minutes, and they've got a series of them about how things are coming together. So there's quite a bit of advancement of these production level vehicles versus the VSS Unity, which was the one that they've flown, I think, 6 or 7 times in New Mexico now. New Mexico gets to say 32 people have been to space from New Mexico.
Wow.
But they took this pause to create the production vehicles, and the reason they decided to do that was so they could work on them quickly, they could turn them around quickly, and instead of launching once every 3 weeks, they're going to launch one every 3 days.
Wow.
The vehicles are designed to be serviced immediately after they land and repurposed and get ready to go. So they did take this pause, and so the first one is supposed to come back, I think, late this fall. You'd have to check the virgingalactic.com website. But we're very excited about that. They'll have to go through a series of requalifications or recertifications. I'm not quite sure what they're doing with the FAA, but they basically have to go back to the FAA and say, well, it's basically the same vehicle, but it's a lot of changes have been made to improve it, and so then they now have to do some drop tests. So what we're going to see is unpowered drop tests, and then we'll see some powered flights where they actually go to space, or maybe like they've done in the past, they'll burn the rocket for only 10 seconds or 20 seconds. But eventually, a year from now, they should be back to operations. And again, we're expecting to see up to 2 launches a week sometime in the next, say, 18 months or so.
I remember they were taking deposits, and for some reason, I just didn't get my deposit in, so I'm not in line.
Well, you should have, because I think it started at a 200,000.
Yeah, it did. It was, it was up there.
Yeah.
So,
Now I think
my
it's
wife just didn't think that was a good use of our.
I'm sure if you were
funds.
willing to work until you're 90, you could afford it. But
Oh, my
it'll be
goodness.
exciting. We've seen several launches here. It's not the same as watching a launch at the Cape, but there's a beauty and an elegance to watching White Knight 2 take off with the spaceship underneath and wind its way up, and then eventually it's up at, I think, around 40,000, 44,000 feet. And we usually can see the contrail. It's about 10 to 15 miles north of the spaceport. And they line up with a runway. We have a 12,000-foot runway, 200-foot wide concrete runway. So it's a big runway, bigger than most. And we see them lining up on the runway, and that's so if there's an issue, they can just glide in and land, which they did several years ago on one of their test flights. But what we've seen them do is then they drop the spaceship, you see a little puff of white smoke, and then you can watch the smoke as it goes up high. And then after a little while, you start hearing the rumble of the rocket engine, which is pretty cool. And then it disappears because it's going to space. And then later on, you wait about 2 or 3 or 4 minutes, and then you hear the sonic booms. And by then, the White Knight 2 is getting closer. It's coming back home. They let the spaceship land first. And the spaceship usually has to make a couple of passes around the spaceport to burn off some of the energy. So you actually get to see the spaceship fly over the spaceport and then come around and come in for a landing. And so it's all pretty thrilling. It's very different than watching a Falcon 9 or something take off, but it's still pretty fun and pretty unique. So getting to see 2 of those a week is going to be, pretty exciting.
Wow. Yeah, that's exciting stuff. And that White Knight 2 is quite some aircraft. I mean, it's massive, and Boy, I'd love to see that up close one day. But yeah, and there's special hangars and all that kind of stuff. So wow, that's exciting. That's coming here like in weeks, really, maybe just a couple of months. All
Yeah, I
that
think
stuff
so.
can
I
start
think
happening.
yeah, the spaceship ought to be the first of the two new spaceships ought to be here sometime toward the end of the year. And like I said, they'll go through a series of just captive carry, and then they'll do some unpowered drops, and then they'll work up to powered flight. So I think it will be late spring or so before they're doing real space flights, and the first ones of those will be payload flights. You know, they have a partnership, I think, with Redwire to build the payload drawers or cabinets in a way that they can go from passenger. They can take out the seats, so they can do 6 passengers, or they can do payloads, or they can do some combination. So they'll be doing suborbital, weightless, microgravity flights just for payloads too. That's part of the business model and part of the activity that they'll be doing out here.
Yeah, that's exciting stuff. Hey, so I got to ask you a question. So New Mexico, not adjacent to any body of water, which you typically find launch pads on. So how did the state of New Mexico or whoever decided come to the conclusion that this is, and you guys are kind of a ways away from everything. It's not like, you're in the city or anything. So how was that location selected and why?
So, there's some interesting things about New Mexico. This is where Robert Goddard came and tested his liquid rocket engine out in Roswell. Of course, Roswell's famous for quote unquote having aliens visit, and you should go check out Roswell.
Out there. They're still out there.
Well, not only that, they have an alien festival every year.
Oh my goodness!
And they have the only McDonald's in the country with a spaceship, a saucer spaceship, as the play area. And they also now, what used to be the Reno air races are going to be in Roswell.
Really? I did not know that.
There's a lot going on in Roswell, believe it or not. But anyway, that goes back a ways. And then the NASA astronauts did a lot of the learning how to do the prospecting and out here. We have something called the NASA White Sands Test Facility, which is right next to White Sands Missile Range. I'll talk about that in a second. And that's where they did the lunar lander engine testing under full vacuum. So they have one of the largest vacuum chambers. They have to suck out all the air, and then they fire up these steam-powered Venturi effect things that suck out even more. Bring the down, and they can bring it down to the point where they can literally in the 60s they could fire the lunar rocket engine. And keep it evacuated, so they understood how that engine would perform in space. So they also do all the testing, the reaction control system testing for the CST Starliner, and they also do material testing. They can fire a grain of sand at 17,000 miles an hour and see what it does to your spaceship. And then next to that is White Sands Missile Range, which we're about to celebrate. I think it's the 80th anniversary of the explosion of the first atomic bomb. And and also White Sands Missile Range is where they call themselves the birthplace of America's missile and space rockets, because that's where Wernher von Braun came in to test the V2s.
I know that.
Yeah, so they're the largest range in the country in terms of a military range. So when they have their what they call the extended range open, they're about 120 miles long by about 45 miles wide. So, but even over that, they have even a bigger airspace complex, and we're underneath that complex. So we're on state land, but we're under that airspace. And under that 1984 Space Launch Act agreement that I talked about, they're obligated to work with us. Military ranges are obligated to work with customers for space activities. So anyway, our location turns out to be a very good location. It's remote. We can do high-risk things. We can work with White Sands, and that means we can do vertical and horizontal, and we're also working on a reentry license. We'd like to be someplace where a spaceship like the Dream Chaser from Sierra Space can land, or where Varda can eventually bring a capsule down. So we're aiming to be a full-featured spaceport, if you will.
Wow. So what's involved in a reentry license? I mean, and this is with the FAA, I'm guessing.
Right. All the commercial spaceports have what's called a Part 420 license with the FAA, and that means that they've gone out and they've done environmental work. They've worked with all their partners and people they could annoy or who have a stake in operating that spaceport. And that, by the way, that's very different than the way, for example, that Blue Origin has the Van Horn site or in Texas, or SpaceX has the Boca Chica site in Texas. Those are considered private launch sites. and they don't actually have a license for launch from the FAA. They're basically industrial parks that are covered by whatever local laws talk about what you can do there. And in those cases, the vehicles that launch there have to have what's called an FAA Part 450 license. So the vehicle manufacturer and works with the FAA to license that vehicle flying from that particular spot. Whereas the commercial spaceports like Spaceport America, we also have this what's called Part 420, which means we've told the FAA how we're going to handle security, how we're going to handle explosives. We've done an environmental impact statement. We've worked with all of our neighbors. We've considered airspace. We've considered mishaps. So a spaceport license is basically something that allows us to be a multi-user spaceport as opposed to these private facilities. And then one more aspect of that is the federal ranges don't actually come under the federal Part 420. So when you talk about Cape Canaveral, which is half of it's NASA, half of it's U.S. Space Force, or Vandenberg, which is Space Force, they fall under DoD regulations for a launch site. So there's different flavors to how these sites are coming about, but we're trying to grow and become a major one for the state of New Mexico, the region, and the nation.
Wow, I had no idea it was that complex. You can't just go point your rocket up to the sky and light the fuse. You gotta have permissions on that. So I'm very curious about. I did do a little bit of looking on the website, and I was surprised to find just a whole list of organizations that are out there. So you've got 10, 15 different companies that are actively doing space-related things at Spaceport America. Yeah.
We kind of divided them up in between tenants, those who have signed a long-term lease or have had a long-term presence, and then we have kind of these customers who come and go. So you can think of us kind of like a civilian test range. You know, people come and they might be with us for a couple of weeks. Like we've had electric car companies come and do things with us. We've had some STEM activity from companies who are launching balloons and have a package that they drop that can measure weather parameters and things, and then that becomes an activity for students in K through 12. We've had an IndyCar here for a while, but then we also have a ground station now, permanent. He's a long-term lease person. We're working on a data center. We have these high altitude platform systems. We have Sirius, which was in our press release, ISC Sirius, which is a Japanese company that is using engines from Colorado, Ursa Major, liquid engines, and they're going to learn how to do takeoff and landings, just like, way back when SpaceX is doing that. And of course, Blue Origin's trying to make sure they can land a vehicle. So it's really just for us, for the state of New Mexico, we're an economic development project is basically the way the state looks at it. The state doesn't have a vested interest necessarily in aerospace per se, but they have a vested interest in doing economic development, and that's why the New Mexico Spaceport Authority was created. But again, it takes technical expertise to attract these customers, to bring them in, to make sure that they meet all the safety regulations, with help them with the FAA, with White Sands Missile Range, with even the local things that we impose as a spaceport. So, but yeah, we're trying to continually add more customers and get bigger and have some real impact on the economy around here.
Yeah, that is exciting. So I got to ask you this. So peering into the future, so rubbing the crystal ball a little bit, what are your hopes and dreams for the next few years for Spaceport America?
So that's a great question. Thank you. The big thing, I think, is eventually to work toward orbital launch, which a lot of people are going to say, well, you can't do orbital launch from an inland spaceport. Well, no, you can't right now, not with the vehicles we have, because we have this interesting attitude that if the vehicle is not going to go where you want it to, you blow it up.
Right.
So, that's effective over the water, but that's probably not a good idea over land. So, one of the things I'm trying to advocate for is that, and it's probably DoD that needs to help, is that, okay, let's not blow up the vehicles when they're not going to make it to orbit. Let's figure out how to land them. Let's figure out how to maybe to dump some fuel, maybe put some wings on them. Maybe we have some parachutes, and maybe we put some money into. There are several companies working on horizontal takeoff and landing for going to orbit, but those companies really need advancements in material sciences so their vehicle is lighter, so they can do single stage to orbit. Things like aerospike engines are really cool. They save some weight and have more power. But the right now, nobody, including NASA, which as we know is kind of concentrated on a 40-year-old sort of technology path, isn't working on how we could make a vehicle safe enough to launch inland. And if you go back in time and think about airports used to be built in unwanted land far away from town because airplanes crashed a lot. And nobody wanted them close to where people live. And now we have airports in the middle of cities, and we routinely have planes fly over us. And that's where we need to head with rockets, vertical and horizontal. When we do that, as a spaceport like in New Mexico, we'll be able to go to orbit. And when you look at the amount of mass that's got to go to orbit over the next 20, 30 years, you can't do that out of the Cape. You can't do that out of Vandenberg or Wallops or Florida. You are going to have many more launch sites. And the problem with the nation is if we're not careful, the launch providers are going to go overseas. They're going to find all these launch sites overseas. We're going to lose the economic benefit. We're going to lose the technology benefit. It's not really the direction we want to head. We want to make sure that all these launch providers can operate out of the United States. And to do that, we need to do some advancements in technology and make sure that inland launch can happen. So that's where I see us in another 5 to 10 years for sure.
That's exciting stuff. Yeah, and it's interesting you talk about the number of launches. I know that the Eastern Range, for example, out of Florida, there'll be, they're planned well over 100 launches, in this year. So, and I can just remember, it seems like not that long ago in the shuttle era, you could count the launches on one hand, really.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is interesting. But what you're talking about really necessitates a particular vehicle. You're talking about vehicle design.
I think so. I think there needs to be some improvements, but not drastic. But they are going to have to be. It probably will raise the cost of getting a kilogram to space because you're going to build in these safety systems. You're going to I'll give you an example. AI. So let's say a rocket we're going to take off, and say it was a Falcon 9, which is probably about the biggest type of rocket we'd ever want to handle, but something on that size, and you lose a couple engines for whatever reason, right? Now you've got some thrust, so you've got a little bit of time, right? An autonomous system might be able to say, okay, I can land here, I can dump some fuel, I can go ahead and stage if I were going to stage, but you need something that's smart enough to make some decisions about where to land or how to abort and to do it safely. So there's a technology that doesn't necessarily raise the cost that much, but it would require some redesign of the rocket. Other designs may be you have some wings or you have a parachute, and that is going to be some major redesign, and then you got to prove it. And there's this thing called the proven flight paradox, where if you've established all your flights over water, which means all your infrastructure is over water, all your costs are there with the launch pad and the gantry and everything, why would you move inland, right? You've already spent all this money to launch on the coast, so why are you going to do inland? So the flight proven paradox creates another problem, but I just think it can be done. But I think it's probably going to be DoD that needs to put some money into it because it's a resilience issue. It's not a commercial market issue yet. You talked about being 100 launches from the Cape. They think they may be able to handle a launch a day. But at some point they're going to saturate. But at the same time, how does DoD make sure that they can replace a satellite that failed for some reason, and they can do it in a resilient way? And I think that's really where an inland spaceport can help, at least in the short term.
Yeah, and like you said, Scott, I think the demand for access to space is going to be your friend in this. And certainly with things, just look at the geopolitical tensions and how that's driving the Space Force activity and things like that. Outside of all the commercial, interest, I think you're right about that. I think there's just the demand is there and the access is not enough. So I'll be interested. I'd like to follow up with you on that. Hey, I've got just a minute or two left. You have something fun coming up in September, an open house.
Right.
So what does that mean when I come to the Spaceport America open house? And it's September 21st, right?
That's right. It's on a Sunday. So what we've been trying to do is open up the spaceport to the public a little bit. When the Virgin Galactic was flying regularly a year and a half or so ago, it gave the chance for the public to see the launches, but they couldn't always go stand on the apron in front of the wonderful Gateway to Space building. So that, as you might know, part of this deal with Virgin Galactic way back when was to build this beautiful hangar called the Gateway to Space. It's a very iconic design. It's very well known in the industry now, but you can't always get close to it. So this gives the public a chance to go stand on the concrete in front of that building. Virgin Galactic is going to bring out the White Knight 2.
Nice.
So last year they made the spaceship visible inside the hangar. This year the White Knight is going to be available to look at close up. We're also going to have some static displays. We think we're trying to work with White Sands Missile Range, our National Guard, and others to get some stuff there. And then we're going to have an astronaut there. So last year we did, and it's great to talk to someone who's been to space for some length of time. So we're going to have some tents, we're going to have food trucks, we're going to have a DJ, and then we have a whole bunch of community partners who are going to have tents and talking about STEM and education, workforce, and basically any community partner that wants to be out there. So it's just a fun little 4 to 5 hours on a Sunday morning, and we're happy to kind of show off the spaceport and give a chance for the public to be right there on site.
Yeah, super. It sounds like a great time. I hope you get a great sunny day for that.
So do I.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, Scott, Executive Director for Spaceport America, Scott McLaughlin. Scott, thanks for taking time today.
Appreciate it. It's good to talk to you.
We'll be back right after this.
The Space Force Association is a way you can get involved in the space community, network with military, industry, and academic leaders, and support our Space Force and the guardians who protect us. The SFA provides opportunities to research, inform, and advocate for a strong Space Force. SFA will keep you informed on the latest developments in space and our Space Force. Show your support. Sign up today at ussfa.org. That's ussfa.org.
My guest is retired Lieutenant General Bill Liquori, who was the Deputy Chief of Space Operations. He was responsible for strategies, requirements, and budget of the United States Space Force. General, thank you so much for taking the time.
Hey, Bruce, absolutely. Thanks for asking. I know my calendar has been a limfac here, but glad to get on with you finally and get a chance to talk to you and your listeners.
Yeah, super excited. And we were talking just previously. I met you at the Spacepower conference this past year, and just had so much, enjoyed the conversation so much. I thought, gosh, we have to share this with all the listeners. So here we are. We've got you. Hey, so I thought one of the things that'd be really interesting is to talk a little bit about your background and how you got to kind of where you were. But let me just detail this a little bit here. So you, your education, so you have a Bachelor of Arts from Boston University. You've got a Master of Arts. You went to Squadron Officer School, several distinguished graduates, School of Advanced Air and Space Studies. You went to a leadership program at MIT, Enterprise Leadership Seminar, Advanced Senior Development Seminar, Leadership at the Peak, all kinds of things. And I saw your assignments are mostly U.S. You've been all over the U.S., although I did see a stint in Germany. But that is, it's amazing. And, you're what we call in the U.S. a three-star general. So that's very far up the ranks. Before we get to all of your time in the military, I'm just curious. How did growing up, point you in the direction? At that time it was the Air Force, but how did you get that direction?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in an Air Force family, actually. My dad was a B-52 pilot for 30 years in the Air Force. It was not necessarily, growing up, it was not something that I was looking to do for a career. I was a computer geek and kind of on the early end of, as computers became more prevalent. And in junior high, I had a teacher who did a class on computer programming or an introduction to it. And I was fascinated by that and kept doing that. And so in my head, I was going to go to school, computer science degree, and I was going to program computer games at some point in time. Like most people, I think, you have a one sight picture, and then the world takes you in different paths and directions. So when I decided that I wanted to go to school at Boston University, the family needed to figure out a way to pay for that. And one option was an Air Force ROTC scholarship. And so I said, actually, yeah, that's probably a neat way to be able to serve. It's a neat way to be able, if I get selected, it's a great way to fund the schooling. And I could do 4 years and provide that payback back. Well, August of 1987, I get to Boston and show up for freshman orientation in Air Force ROTC, and I got hooked in ROTC. I was an athlete all growing up. I loved team sports and things like that. And here I was as a part of a team in Detachment 355, the Flying Tigers at Boston University. So that kept me hooked and engaged all through college. I didn't necessarily want to be a pilot, even though Dad was a pilot. Like I said, I was interested in computers and those type of things. By the time I got to my senior year, though, I said, you know what? I've been doing this for 4 years, and maybe I do want to be a pilot. So I had allergies as a kid. I tried to get a waiver. The Air Force said thanks, but no thanks. Luckily, Dad was still on active duty. And at the time that we were filling out our dream sheet that kind of lists what you want to do, he said, hey, if you can't be a pilot, there's this relatively new career field called space operations. And it might be interesting to you from a technology perspective and those type of things. So I put that down on my sheet, and the rest is history, as they say. I got selected. I ended up at undergraduate space training in April of 1992, and the very first assignment was at what was then Falcon Air Force Base, now Schriever Space Force Base, but operating communication satellites, and kind of much like ROTC, I got hooked. I was a part of a great team. We got to do some really cool things, and the 4-year experiment of paying back my scholarship kind of turned into one assignment after another, and I was fortunate that my wife, Amy, in the early days, it was just her, and then the 3 kids all were willing to come along for the ride. And so we kind of all, went one assignment after another, and no regrets.
Oh, that's amazing. I hear that a lot from military folks. No regrets. It was a challenging career, but a rewarding one too. I got to ask you, so going back junior high school, computer coding. So what actually were you doing? So you and I are kind of the same era. So I remember there was not a lot
of age of your listeners whether this is going to. So at the time, it was BASIC was the programming language, right? So I was doing BASIC programming, and I mean, it was all kind of text-based type stuff. Graphics were very, very, early, in infancy, at least in the computers that I was able to work with. Number one, you were usually looking at a monitor that was green screen, right? It wasn't some multicolor monitor, those type of things. Finally, by the time I got in the Air Force, I remember my first satellite operations assignment at the 3rd Space Ops Squadron. We had 2 computer screens that we had in front of us every time we went in contact with a satellite. One screen was green and the other one was color. And so if you had to verify if your data points were within limits, you went to the color screen so you could see red, yellow, green. And if you were doing your typing of commands and things like that, you did it on the green screen. So yeah, I started in BASIC. In college, of course, as a computer scientist, there are multiple courses where you learn all kinds of languages, but the Boston University curriculum at the time was based in a language called C. And so that's what we used at that point in time.
Yeah, a lot of C. Fortran, probably some of that in there.
Fortran, Lisp, COBOL, yeah, a lot of them that I wouldn't be able to do now, but
yeah, gosh, that's amazing. So take me through ROTC it's an amazing journey. But side note, my daughter has done that. She's a nurse in the Air Force, actually. Yeah, and so
what does she do?
She's a nurse.
Now I'm interviewing you. Sorry.
No, she's a nurse up at Dayton. What's the?
Very cool, Wright-Patterson.
Yeah, Wright-Pat. Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, I'd love to go up there, and I will tell you the strangest thing. First time I took her up there to help her move in, she goes, "Dad, we can go on the base, so we'll see where I work." So I said, "That'd be great." So I was driving, and we pulled up to the gate, hand over the IDs, and the guy steps back and snaps a salute. And I thought, why is that guy saluting me? I don't get that. And I looked over at my daughter and I realized she was saluting. And it's like, that was a moment. I was like, this is the girl I changed the diapers on. And anyway, proud dad moment. But yeah, and she absolutely loved the teams aspect of it as well. Just the camaraderie. I mean, very close in ROTC.
Same for me. Same exact thing for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. So take me through like some of those first assignments, because I'm real curious about the journey. So it sounds like it was like, step by step. It wasn't like, hey, one day I'm going to go into the higher ranks of the Air Force and the Space Force here.
Yeah, no, certainly early on, that was never in the cards. I don't know how many people when they're a cadet in college are thinking that way. But for me, it was, all right, so I've graduated college. I'm going to my first assignment. The very first assignment, like most people, was a training assignment. So I went to undergraduate space training at then Lowry Air Force Base, which is now closed. But 3 months of training and introduction to space operations and all things space. And it was fascinating to me, much like Dad had said, kind of, hey, this may interest you. And it sure did. Not only that, I met such a diverse group of friends in the training class. And then interestingly enough for me, I was fortunate enough that the squadron that I was selected to go to had a brand new satellite program. It was a brand new communication satellite. We hadn't even launched the first one yet. Okay. So because of that, almost all of my undergraduate space training class all went to the same assignment. So we had become good friends for 3 months in Denver, and then this assignment takes us down to Colorado Springs, and so for 4 years, we're hanging out together. For those of us that were married, our spouses have become good friends, and I think like most people in the military, your first assignment is where you make some lifelong friendships. I know it happened that way for my dad. It happened that way for me, for my brother, who was an intel officer in the Air Force, and for my son, who's now in his second assignment. I know I had a chance to visit him multiple times and saw the same type of thing, the camaraderie, the teamwork, all of those types of things. So, so I go to the first assignment and I'm going to operate communication satellites. And I mean, it was just, to me, it was kind of one of these really cool things. The downside to it is, unlike a pilot like my dad or my son who gets into the cockpit of their plane, they take off, they fly around in their domain and see the domain and experience the domain. We don't really do that on the space side of the house, right? We experience our domain through data, right? Through the computer. Unless you're an astronaut, and if they weren't going to let me be a pilot, they weren't going to let me be an astronaut. So that was out. But it was still fascinating to me to know that I was operating a series of communication satellites. By the time I left, we had launched 6 of them. So number one, launch is a fascinating thing in space operations. It's just really cool. The tension of the countdown, all of the preparation to get there. And then the next tension is, when is that satellite going to be overhead an antenna station? Are we going to get data from it? It just captured me. And, there were highs and lows, certainly, in every assignment, and working through those challenges with a bunch of other people. And when you succeed, it's just a really good feeling. Early on in that time, the United States was involved in some, conflicts over in Bosnia and the Balkans. And at one point we were asked to take our satellite that was providing communications to a certain part of the world and move it so that we could provide communications to that conflict. And so, I wasn't on the front lines per se, but I had a chance to contribute to something that was bigger than myself, certainly bigger than our squadron. But it's pretty cool to think about that you're supporting people who are in harm's way and they're counting on you, kind of thing. And so that was the first assignment. As I come to the end of that assignment, the squadron commander at the time came to me and said, hey, are you interested, as you look for a second assignment, are you interested in going to interview for a job I can't tell you about? It's like, okay, sure. It sounds interesting to me. So I get on an airplane and I fly out to Northern California to then Onizuka Air Force Base, which is now closed. We're seeing a trend here of bases that have closed since I left, but In any case, at the time, it was a classified assignment. About a year and a half after I arrived, it became declassified. I was working for the National Reconnaissance Office out at Onizuka. And man, you want to talk about yet another assignment that captured my attention, my interest, all those things, and another group of phenomenal individuals who I had a chance to work with. Working for the National Reconnaissance Office was a really cool deal, and had a chance to support a lot of world events in that assignment. Then I came to a crossroads. It was like, what do I do next? And I learned about and had an opportunity to apply and then get selected for our Air Force Weapons School. So the Air Force's version of Top Gun is probably the easiest way for those that have either seen the original, the sequel, or both. It's our version. And shortly before I went there, the Air Force said, we need to make a space squadron here. And so our role as space officers at the weapons school was to learn all of the various space systems. So I just mentioned I had 2 assignments leading up to this. So I knew 2 space systems. We have a lot more. And so the course it's hundreds upon hundreds of hours of learning every space system and learning it to the kind of graduate level, so that we could then turn around and help pilots, intel officers, the other parts of the Air Force do their jobs better based on the data that we could provide to them from space. Fascinating assignment. I went there with the intent of going out to the field to help an operational unit. Like many people, some things work out the way you plan, some things don't. The schoolhouse actually said, you know what, we want to keep you as an instructor. And so a little bit of disappointment at the time, but it actually turned out to be one of the best assignments ever, because you really learn the material when you teach it over and over and over, and you see others go through it. And I had a chance to really make some good, tight friendships and a good, strong network with the rest of the Air Force that if I'd have gone to another space assignment, I probably wouldn't have seen and met those people until much later in my career. And so that was kind of another cool assignment to get to go do that. And then series of school and a bunch of others we could talk about if you want, but that's kind of how I got started. And I kept being more interested and saw what I was doing and the impacts of it and wanted to do more.
Yeah, that's exciting. You were married at the time, yeah?
I got married a couple months after graduating from college, as a matter of fact. So my wife has been on the journey from the beginning.
Wow, that's believe it or not, I hear that rather frequently with some military folks as well. Yeah, that's exciting.
We met in Boston. She had lived in Rochester, New York her whole life. Her family's from Rochester. Nobody in her family had served in the military, so this was a brand new thing to all of them. And I can remember as we got engaged and then married, lots of questions about what does this mean? But they have all been along for the ride, and I have had as many of her family at my military ceremonies as I had my family. It's been really good. I was super fortunate. To have 2 very supportive families.
That's it's a team sport, as the saying goes. So So you're, let's see, first lieutenant, second lieutenant, captain, and then you jump up to major. Are you still doing like hands-on flying satellites kind of stuff, or?
Yeah, no, not at that point. So at the weapons school, I was promoted to major. I was promoted and pinned on before I left the weapons school. Then it was time to go back to Air Force schooling. You rattled off a bunch of schools. I went to 2 of those schools after that down in Montgomery, Alabama.
So those are like officer.
So
what is the point? So help me. So I'm a rookie, never been in the military, but I'm very interested. So I noticed there's a lot of kind of like steps that people stop in down at Maxwell Air Force Base and other places a lot for things. What are those steps that you gotta kind of have to do?
Great question. Yeah, my family jokes that the Air Force realizes I still need a lot of schooling, so that's all I did my whole career. But it's actually, the Air Force, the Space Force, the military writ large, we do a really good job of leadership development, professional development training, and that's what all of these schools are designed to do. I tell a story that when I finished my last final exam at Boston University, I was convinced at that point I was done with school forever because I had made it. I now know that if you're ever offered schooling, and especially schooling for free, don't pass it up. So anyway, the professional development that we do in the service starts ROTC, as kind of your introduction to the service. Then usually as a captain, you go to, in the Air Force and Space Force anyway, we go to Squadron Officer School, which is a little bit shorter course. It has changed over the years, anywhere from 4 weeks to 6 weeks, designed to kind of expose you to the rest of the Air Force. At that point, as a captain, you know whatever career field you're in, and now it exposes you to your peers in the rest of the Air Force. Then as a major, typically, sometimes Lieutenant Colonel, we send people to what's called Air Command and Staff College. And now the Space Force has developed kind of their own version of generically, we call these intermediate military education or developmental education. And that's designed to expand on what you've already learned, as well as kind of teach you to be a staff officer, because typically at that point in your career, you're now going to go to a staff. To the point of your question, you're not going to be operating satellites or necessarily flying airplanes. You're likely going to be on a staff that's providing support to all of those frontline operations. It also does a pretty good job of preparing you to be a squadron commander if you're fortunate enough to have that opportunity. I chose to stay for a second year. All of the services have a version of an advanced studies group school. Ours in the Air and Space Force is called SAS, School of Advanced Air and Space Studies. That is really designed to be a year-long crash course in improving your strategic thinking, building an argument to support a theory or a strategy. It's literally read a book every day, go in and debate it, and then they break it up into different blocks of instruction, and you write a paper after each one of those, and then do a dissertation at the end that you have to defend. But it was really foundational for me. That level of rigor and training, both the weapons school as a captain, and then as a major selected to be lieutenant colonel at the School of Advanced Air and Space Studies. Now I was really armed and able to begin to get into on a staff. You're really kind of building the case for resources or for different types of operations and things of that nature. And so those schools definitely gave me a foundation that opened the doors for the rest of the opportunities I had in my career. After Maxwell, I went to the Pentagon. My first time at the Pentagon, I worked on a staff there for the Undersecretary of the Air Force, who was triple-hatted as the Undersecretary of the Air Force, the Department of Defense Executive Agent for Space, and the Director of the National Reconnaissance Office. And this staff was designed to integrate unclassified and classified space. And so I did that for a year. I had been selected for squadron command, and then I ended up back commanding an ops squadron, actually at the Aerospace Data Facility in Colorado, in Aurora, Colorado, at Buckley Space Force Base. We had a chance to lead a group of, we were all airmen at the time, but, operators, acquirers, intelligence professionals, and then 4 different contractor teams. So really had a chance to work with industry, all in service of a particular mission that we had. So that was my first chance to command, which was fascinating and a lot of fun to be able to
tell me
a
about
vision
that.
for an organization and basically, kind of take care of an organization and make sure it was resourced to do the things that it needed. And when you found the superstars with the good ideas and the things that were going to improve our mission, you figured out a way to resource them and get out of their way, kind of thing. And it was an amazing opportunity. And so that's probably where I first kind of get the hook of the enjoyment of kind of leading a team and saying, hey, if the Air Force will let me, I'd like to do this command thing at successive levels if I have the opportunity, which I ended up having the opportunity to do that. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. So that's kind of major. So you went to the kind of the preparatory kind of coursework, learned all about leadership and kind of the broader Space Force, Air Force, and then did a little stint at the Pentagon. Then they said, here you go. And they threw you in the deep end there. And so that was, how long did you command the squadron there?
2 years, from the summer of 2006 to the summer of 2008, which is kind of the typical, if there is such a thing, the typical command tour is 2 years if everything's going well. Every once in a while, somebody might get extended for a year just based on different things. But for me, it was summer of 2006 to the summer of 2008.
2 years, that doesn't seem like a long time to really move things forward.
But by the time you get to that second year, you're like, oh, just give me another year. I haven't gotten everything done.
Yeah.
We as a team haven't gotten everything done. And the reality is the team will continue to get things done. And we have a lot of good, strong leaders in our service. And so it's time to let somebody else step in. And I was fortunate. I had a very good friend who was my director of operations, which in an ops squadron is kind of the number 2. And I had a chance to turn the squadron over to him. And so it was good continuity for the squadron, and he was a phenomenal leader as well. Colonel Mike Jackson, and he took over after I left and kept things moving.
That is amazing. We're going to take a break. We are here with Lieutenant General Bill Liquori, and we've got more to come. And that wraps up the show for today, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I know I certainly have enjoyed getting to know both of my guests. And a special thank you to my guests, to Scott McLaughlin, the Executive Director for Spaceport America, and to retired 3-star General Bill Liquori. Thank you to both of them. And by the way, we'll have a chance to hear more from General Liquori in the next episode, so be sure and tune in for that. Till then, my name is Bruce with the Space Force Association, and you've been listening to the Spacepower Radio Show.